You're listening to the Results Driven Organizations podcast with Dr. Tanya Lowe, a podcast of curated conversations with C-suite leaders and those who support organizational growth and development. Get ready for inspiring interviews, educational lessons, and thought-provoking discussions that will challenge you to execute something new and innovative that will drive results in your organization. And now, here's Dr. Tanya Lowe.
Hello, you're listening to episode 27 of the Results Driven Organizations podcast with Dr. Tanya Lowe. Using my results driven philosophy of strategy, leadership, teams, and customer experiences, I help organizations develop their best kept secret, their human capital. Our guest today is Marty Strong. Marty Strong is a decorated retired Navy SEAL officer and the author of the new business leadership book, Be Nimble: How the Navy SEAL Creative Mindset Wins on the Battlefield and in Business. After leaving 20 years in the military, Marty spent 7 years as a successful investment advisor with UBS. He is now the CEO and the Chief Strategy Officer of the LGS Management Group, Incorporated, an employee-owned multi-company enterprise focusing on training and healthcare. Marty, welcome to RDO.
Hey, how you doing, Tanya? Thank you for having me.
Thanks for being with us today. So I'd love to jump right in and set the tone for our discussion today with chapter 1 of your book. I'd love for you to share with our listeners your leadership journey from Navy SEAL officer to CEO, and what are some of the lessons that you learned about leadership and mindset?
Well, I started out as an enlisted SEAL. I joined the Navy and didn't have any intention of staying in any longer than 4 years, which is a normal enlistment for an enlisted person in the Navy. And the SEAL teams, like all elite special operations units, put a premium on leadership, and the leadership isn't necessarily assigned only to rank. Mm-hmm. In those small units, everybody has to know how to lead. Everybody knows how to plan. Everybody knows how to execute the task, the mission. And so from the very beginning, you're expected to have leadership capabilities, and you don't necessarily get credentials until a couple of years have gone by, because you have to learn the craft, you have to learn the job. And eventually you do start to get more rank and get some more conventional assignments where people are assigned to you. You're a boss, and but most of those are administrative leadership tasks. Right. They're not, they're kind of combat leadership tasks. And the second half of my 20 years, I was an officer. I went to officers candidate school 10 years in, and started my SEAL officer time, and as a brand new ensign, just like any other brand new ensign, except that I'd had 10 years, a full decade of being a SEAL already. So I had a lot of advantages, and that those advantages conveyed immediately to being a leader by rank, because I wasn't new to the game. I wasn't making the same mistakes that young junior officers would make. So I was able to apply 10 years worth of technical, tactical information, knowledge, and leadership experience immediately as an officer. Mm-hmm. And that job does require you to lead. It's by definition, you're the person who's making decisions, calling the shots. Eventually, you're the person that signs off on the plans, whatever the plans are going to be.
Right.
And then in the special operations world, those plans are usually tossed out the window the second you land on the ground and you're facing reality. So that's been my experience, and I think that's most of the guys' experience. Doesn't matter if it's SEALs or Green Berets or Marine Raiders or any of the special forces. You do the best to plan, you get in there, and then you have to lead in the moment, which is a different kind of emotional and I guess motivational leadership. Mm-hmm. You have to convey that you have a grip on the situation, and hopefully up to that point you've convinced everybody over time that you're solid, you know what you're doing, and they'll follow your leadership in that moment. So that's a lot to say, try to wrap up 20 years of exposure to that, but they do spend a lot of time in special forces and special operations running you through scenarios where they let you fail, mm-hmm. they make you fail, mm-hmm. they watch you deal with failure, They watch you lead through failure, and then they critique you afterwards, and they try to point out things that you can do to improve. And I'm talking, in 1 year, you might go through 20 or 30 of those scenarios of various lengths and complexity. So you get a lot of practice at messing up. And the whole idea there is that when the day comes where, the chips are down and lives are in the balance, you don't mess up as big as you might have if you didn't have all that practice.
Right. A lot of what you said really, it can be applied to CEOs today and what they are having to deal with, thinking strategically, leading in the moment, especially during this pandemic, whatever phase we're in now. And then I love what you said about failure, leading through failure, not being afraid to fail, and learning those lessons. I think that's something we should talk more about, and not in the workplace have people to be afraid of that, because I know in some of the companies that I go into, everybody's afraid to fail. And it's like, if you fail, you're not going to die. The question you need to ask yourself is, what can I learn to do this better? So did you find that in your own experience through those failure exercises? How did that increase your ability to do it better the next time?
Well, the first lesson I think you learn, and you can do this in the commercial world, it's not done very often, but you can do the same kind of scenario-based repetitive training, risk taking without real risk and consequences, and then critique the performance afterwards. So you get repetitions at failing. It strips failing away from self-esteem. Failing in business isn't the same as failing in combat. If you fail in combat, people die, you might die. In business, failing's embarrassing. Failing could get you, fired, but then you could get hired again, a month later. So the consequences aren't as great. They feel like they are emotionally. And with the self-esteem component thrown in there, people are afraid to fail because they don't want to look bad. And they have a certain image of themselves as a successful fill in the blank, technical expert, leader, et cetera. And they don't want to get toppled off of that pedestal. And they sure as heck don't want to volunteer to be, in that high risk situation. So most of the time what you find is the exact opposite in the commercial world. People are avoiding those situations and scenarios where they might learn something from failing.
Yeah.
And they've attached failure to self-esteem, job security, et cetera. In the military, in general, we practice all the time to test what our capabilities are and find what our limitations are, and do it in practice rather than doing it in the battlefield where the consequences are worse. And I think in my experience after leaving uniform, that I guess low risk tolerance, a fear of change, a fear of a disruption of the status quo, what my current self-esteem, my current positional authority, my current projection of personal brand represents is intact, and I want to keep it that way. And I don't want my boss to change that. And so some new initiative, we're going to grow faster, we're going to work in some different way, we're going to push into another territory. Those are all threats.
Yeah.
And that's another thing that drives the fear element, the emotional part of it up. It's a threat, and it's perceived and addressed as a threat by most people in business. So all I would say is it really isn't. And if you're a leader, you have to understand the human psychology that I just laid out and put your people in as many administrative training scenarios as you can. And as a leader, you have to allow them to fail and not overreact to that failure.
Yeah.
Let them go ahead and fail. Let them learn. That's how kids learn to walk, right? We forget. I've got 5 kids and 5 grandkids. And even after I'm 5 kids, it wasn't until I started watching the first grandkid trying to walk there that suddenly you remember, man, this is hard. It takes a long time. And, it is. It takes a long time. And you fail until you learn. And then you learn and you practice what you know, and then you be able to execute it at a much higher level of performance.
I don't know if it was in your book or in your blog that I read this, where you talk about velocity failure and volume failure. Can you explain to the audience how that works, and if I understood it right, how they can support colleagues through the process with velocity failure?
Sure. So there were three components, and I kind of, I guess I codified them about 12, 15 years ago. I was analyzing a lot of individuals in an organization, and I was trying to figure out why some people seem to be coping. And there was a lot of scaling going on. So there was a lot of rapid change and a lot of challenges. Some people seem to be coping. Some people were barely hanging on. Some people were falling apart. And I looked at it and I thought, okay, so it's really kind of three factors that seem to be in play here. And they're three different things. Some of the people are dealing with these challenges in a negative way if it's based on the velocity of the work coming at them. Mm-hmm. And that also means the speed of delivery or performance. Yeah. So maybe they were doing something before and they had to do it in a week, and now they got to do it in 2 days. Or they had to do one task and now they got to do 10 tasks in the same time frame. The second element was volume. So let's say they're used to doing, a certain level of effort per day, and all of a sudden they get 10 times that same level of effort loaded on them. It's the speed isn't anymore, but there's a lot more of the same simple tasks. Mm-hmm. And the third one was complexity. So you can have people that actually can handle upping their game, excuse me, and handling the volume increase. They buckle down and they handle the velocity of delivery, whether it's a time velocity or whether it's the speed of execution. And then they fall apart if the tasks become more complex. So any of those three categories, anybody could be failing in or succeeding in, partially, completely, or not at all. And I was able to kind of chunk everybody into those three categories and look at, first off, is it a training issue? Is it a systemic infrastructure process workflow problem? It's a proverbial fire hose.
Right.
Their resume says they can handle a steady stream of water at a certain, velocity and a certain amount of water per hour or whatever. And it's a pretty simple, straightforward task. Mm-hmm. And because we've changed and grown, and because we've added new clients, whatever the driver is, nobody was paying attention that slowly somebody was turning up the spigot, and now there's a fire hose hitting this person, right?
Wow.
Or they've got to do something different than they did before, so the complexity has changed in some way. And so that means it's a failure of leadership to structure the work. It means that the person isn't failing, that the leadership is not anticipating. Better to anticipate than discover it as a semi-destroyed employee who's completely covered in water because they can't handle the fire hose.
Right.
You want to anticipate this. So every time you scale, every time you grow, you want to start thinking through in your mind, kind of like a storyboard of what's going to happen at different points in the workflow, what's going to happen to the individuals in those points in the workflow. Mm-hmm. And is it going to be a volume challenge, a velocity challenge, a complexity challenge, a combination of all three? Are they the right person for what's going to be the new normal or next normal? And if they aren't, is it something that can be corrected by training, or is it something that you have to replace it with a different kind of a person? And to give you an example, if you had somebody doing air traffic control and one plane, very slow single engine plane, landed once a day, always at 2:00, always came in from the same direction, and he had 2 or 3 radios, so he always had communications, and the pilot already knew how to land the plane, your air traffic control duty and responsibility would be defined with that level of complexity and that level of velocity and that level of volume. There's only one plane a day.
Right.
A lot of people could handle that. Now you put them in, LAX's tower, and you send, thousands of aircraft stacked all over in multi-level airspace. And some of the pilots are good. Some of the pilots aren't so good. Some are making mistakes, and all that's going on. And for a person to sit there and drink a cup of coffee and direct all that and not make mistakes, that's a different kind of talent.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like the same task at first blush, but it's not. So you might have to replace the person. At a minimum, though, you should identify what training is required and do that in advance of the change of, before the challenge really hits.
Right.
And if you can do that as an enlightened leader, as part of your scaling, planning, anticipating what's going to be the impact of growth or change, you're going to have an organization that tends to do well and keeps punching through all your goals instead of, the wheels are always wobbling all over the place. You're not sure why.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that goes back to, creating these learning scenarios with a strategy in mind to anticipate and plan for change, anticipate and plan for scale. And the question that I find myself asking is, do you have the right people in the right seat on the bus? Can they handle the team? Can they handle where the organization is going? So I think that is it's right in alignment with a lot of what I've seen happening in companies today. And so I guess how can I don't know, I want to ask how can we support, how can we use this concept during kind of where we are now? What would you suggest CEOs and companies do now? Because we're in a big place of change. And how could they apply this to be more successful on the other side?
Well, the first difficulty is empathy. I mean, most people that are in charge have been disconnected from the trenches for a while. And
yes.
and they may walk by and they may look at the work that's being done. And depending on how much advance warning they give and their attitude and their interaction, communications, their persona in a workplace, everybody goes to attention, gets on their best behavior, smiles, and then when they walk out of that particular room, they all go back to whatever their mode was or mood. And so you didn't really pick up anything,
Mm-hmm.
So if you don't understand what's going on, it's probably because you're not empathetic. And if you're not empathetic, it's probably because you don't know what's going on.
Right.
So how do you know that? Well, one thing is listening to your direct reports telling you how things are going. That's not going to work. The best thing to do, and use the military metaphor, is to walk the battle line.
Mm-hmm.
You can listen to radio calls and look at battle reports, but to get up there and see what's going on, then you see that the troops are stressed, that they only have 5 rounds of ammo left. Nobody told
Right.
you that. So you realize that what you think is going on is not what's going on. And it's going to change the way you decide to move forward in the next, day, week, or month ahead. So that's one thing. Try to get out there, try to find out what's going on, tactile appreciation, understanding.
Mm-hmm.
Don't really rely on intermediaries, and spend time, because eventually everybody will start letting their hair down. You'll start seeing the things that tell you what the truth of the matter is. The other thing is you have to assume that the people are doing the best they can, and that whatever your structure in the past was, it's not necessarily sacred, and it may not be working, and it may not ever work again. So, the reverse of automation, replacing a person with a technology, is to take a job, again, back to kind of a workflow process analysis, and say, well, this will never be a one-person job anymore.
Mm-hmm.
This is a 2-part process now. So what we don't need is one superhuman. What we need is 2 people, and we bifurcate the task, and maybe we have a third person that either oversees is a quality filter before it moves to the next step or something. And between those 3 components, those human components, this is going to get done right, not pass anything to the next step of the process that's got errors embedded or anything. That's more human beings, not less human beings.
Right.
So it can go both ways. And so, it's a fallacy to think that you either can find, the super Marvel comic book character that's going to do the really hard job that's 10 times better, has 10 times more volume, or excuse me, 10 times faster, 10 times more volume, and 10 times more complex, because that's just not going to happen.
Right.
And so I think the reverse of that. Break it down into smaller parts. Maybe it's a multi-person task now. And then if it's a critical task, think about what kind of oversight or cross checks you want to put in place to make sure that it gets done right. And if you're still scaling, at some point you're going to challenge, a 1-part solution that becomes a two-person solution. 8 months later, pay attention, because if you keep growing, if that fire hose is increasing in velocity, your 2 people are stressed.
Yeah.
You can't just put it in there in a plan, set it in motion, and walk away from it and forget about what's driving the problem, that the challenges in the first place, which is growth, scaling, and the dynamics of all kinds of changes, that the exterior marketplace and the environment, the economy, pandemic stuff is impacting that organization and causing it to react to.
Absolutely. And the people in the organization. So I love that you said, empathy. A lot of the challenges I think leaders are facing today, they were always there. The pandemic just put a flashlight on it, a floodlight. And don't rely on intermediaries. Walk the battle line. I love that. I believe if more managers and CEOs and VPs got into the trenches to get a visual of what's really happening, and talk to the people, they could possibly make better decisions. So Marty, I did a little research on Navy SEALs, and here's what I found out. As it relates to Navy SEAL qualities, team attitude and integrity are closely related to SEALs. And no matter how strong and determined a SEAL is individually, few missions are successful without the team. So I talk about this in my book, I developed my team concept, my team rah-rahness later in life, because I'd always been the department of one until I was thrown in and I had these huge teams, and I struggled. And that struggle helped me to really learn to appreciate the value of a team. The value of a strong team. What would you tell a CEO or a manager who is struggling with leading their teams, especially remotely right now?
So I read a book recently, and forgive me because I'm trying to remember the author, who brought up a concept of there are few real teams. Most quote unquote teams are actually just committees. And I thought, that was a very insightful comment and observation, because, and this was a consultant. He wrote a book called The Consulting Bible. And my experience in the teams was an interesting one, because the focus was on individual excellence, individual screening for different kinds of characteristics, psychological and physical and intellectual, the ability, high IQ, et cetera, and a sense of humor, which I'm telling you, that's a key. So if you pre-screen for a sense of humor, a lot of things can go wrong and you can still be okay about it, and so that's the first kind of step. And then you find that as they teach you and train you your skills, you are required to execute your job, but in concert with everybody else. So it's kind of like a band.
Mm-hmm.
It's, if you have a lead guitarist that's the best in the world, but the drummer or the bass guitarist stink, your band stinks.
Mm-hmm.
So it really starts to become more about the we rather than the me. But the me is important, because your job for the whole time you're in uniform is to be the best bass player you can possibly be. You spend all your time thinking about how to be better. You train, you practice, you learn, you study, you ask other people, because the last thing you want to do is let the band down.
Right.
And the music of a real team, like a band, comes together in harmony, and you can almost instinctively say, these guys all sound great together, and that's why they're so much better together, even though they might be talented individually. Now, if you look at a business team, I don't think anybody thinks about that when they put together a team. They tend to put together a team based on rank, positional, authority within an org structure. I mean, there are some people that get smart when it comes to like research, development, design. They pick people that maybe aren't from the same group, and they put them into a room, kind of a disassociated group of people, give them a target, a goal, a task, and a time frame, and they become a team usually over time, because they've got a commitment to what they're supposed to be doing. But when you bring everybody in and say, okay, you're this team or that team, and after this meeting, you go back and you get back into your silo, you're not really, you're just a representative of your silo, and temporarily you're sitting in a meeting about the team goals.
Right.
And that last part about the, the silos and walking away from a committee meeting, that's also paraphrased from that book. So that's not my concept, but I agree with it. And so if you're going to build teams, think about how you'd put a band together. And you don't want any one person in the band to be so overwhelmingly powerful that they can't harmonize. And then you have to make sure that the band understands, the team understands what you expect of them. And it may or may not even be achievable, and getting 85% of the way there may be sufficient for your needs, because you don't want to strap them with perfection, because then they'll struggle trying to analyze everything to death. Sometimes you can just, I'm telling you, sometimes you can get people in a room, tell them they've got a week to think about something. You walk in 3 days into that week and say, okay, I want to know right now, what would you do right now? And they stare at you like, well, we're not ready. Well, I want to know now. And you could actually facilitate a brainstorming session and get probably most of what you're going to get at the end of the week anyway, because they all kind of intrinsically know the path. They kind of know the direction. They kind of know what's going to work, but they're still hemming and hawing, and they're still using their administrative communication habits from wherever they came from before they became a team. And, those are all barriers to clarity. And sometimes you can just shock them into being honest and open, and you get a lot of intuition that way.
Yeah. The intuitive leader. I like that. Do you feel that those same team concepts work remotely with building a strong remote team?
That's a really good question. That's a good one. One of my board members asked me, I guess towards the end of last year, he said, Marty, I know your leadership style. I've already mentioned some of it. I go around, I check the pulse, I observe and make sure. And then I go to the leader responsible for somebody and say, Susie or Joey looks like they're a little bit on the edge or stressed out or whatever, or something. They okay? And he goes, well, how do you do that? When back then nobody was coming into the office. I sent everybody home, about 65 people in the headquarters office that we had. Most of our people are scattered all over the United States, but we have about 65 there. I sent them all home like the third week of March last year, and I would come in there all by myself, work for a while. We have a Jenga game and some other stuff, and I'd be doing Jenga by myself, and we'd have a cornhole thing. I'd be throwing cornhole by myself, and by the time he asked that question, which was more in the fall, only my finance people were coming in, and I go, yeah, you're right. It's like I've had a whole arm taken off. My leadership style is much more interpersonal and also intuitive. So how do you read body language when everybody's on screen? They're on,
right?
Unless they don't want to be seen, then they just show their name,
right, and their picture.
Which means you're not getting anything from that either.
Right.
But if I came up to somebody and said, I want to put you in charge of XYZ, and they look like I just told them that I want them to jump out of an airplane at 30,000 feet. I see that reaction. I see the body language. I see how their eyes, I can see all that. You can't, a lot of that's being shielded by this virtual remote viewing kind of a thing. Yeah. I think from a standpoint of team development or developing a solution through a team, the real shortfall, and it may just be a technology shortfall, is the idea of getting around a whiteboard and having everybody just blurt out stuff and scribbling stuff on a whiteboard until you kind of get to something. That's harder to do in this medium, but it's not necessarily harder to do if you're not using a whiteboard, just having everybody go off to their own corners and then come back and say, okay, what did you come up with? Debate it, discuss it, make another decision about where we're going next, give everybody assignments, everybody break apart, come back.
Yeah.
It's a little clunky. Obviously, everybody's doing it, but yeah, you're really the human interaction. I think human beings are designed. Their anatomy, their brains are designed to collect information about other human beings.
Yeah.
By
be
being
together.
around them, by being around them, being near them, threats and opportunities and all those things, and that's very difficult to do this way.
Yeah. Yeah. What do you believe are some of the challenges leaders face today? And what would you recommend for them in how to deal with those challenges?
Well, in Be Nimble, I speak more to the internal scaling challenges, which that can be a problem nowadays. But my second book, Be Visionary, with Strategic Leadership in the Age of Optimization, which is going to be coming out at the end of next summer.
Okay.
That book is more aligned with your question. It deals kind of with the black swan level event that nobody expected, the strategic, meteorite impact kind of a thing. And that happens all the time in business. It's just that it's not public. Everybody doesn't know. Suddenly a competitor comes out with something that's, leapfrogs past you, and your number one product is dead.
Mm-hmm.
You try to see if you can sell it in some other country or something, keep the life going a little longer, but you're pretty much dead in the United States. And that stuff happens all the time. And those moments are handled differently by different leadership teams and by different individual leaders. So obviously the pandemic was a major black swan, but you can prepare for things like this. Mm-hmm. Even though if you don't know exactly how it's going to happen, you can prepare for it. And one of the ways, is we've already been talking about, is you have to be, empathetic and intimately in tune with what's going on the ground level in your business.
Absolutely.
You have to understand your subordinate, if you have subordinate leaders, you have to understand their strengths and weaknesses. You should be trying to work and mentor and coach them through their weaknesses and trying to reinforce their strengths, and then encouraging them to do the same thing down one layer below them. You need to look at the workflow, the workflow management, the way jobs are designed, the way people are incented. And you have to also make a culture of people that are willing to fail and that understand that things can change. And when it changes, this is what we're going to do. We are all going to huddle up, and we are going to figure out what's going on, and we're going to come up with a solution, and then we're going to execute. What we're not going to do is we're not going to sit on our hands and hope and pray that things just go back the way they were.
Right.
So that's kind of a SEAL thing anyway.
Yeah.
I've been on lots of missions where they told us one thing was going to happen, or there'd be 4 guys, and then there's 40, and you show up and you can sit there and whine and cry and say, oh, wow, this isn't what they said. They said it wasn't going to rain, or they never said it was going to be this cold. Where did this hail come from? You could do that, or you could just kind of suck it up and say, things have changed. It is what it is. What are we going to do? Mm-hmm. And I think people appreciate that approach. I know fear causes people to stop thinking a lot of times, but they appreciate somebody saying, everybody shut up right over there. That's the exit. I know the theater is on fire. We got plenty of time. Get in a line, walk out that door. You'll all be okay.
Yeah.
They don't care who says that, but they appreciate the person that said it. And got everybody calmed down and moving towards a solution. So with the pandemic, or with anything else that challenges the business, I think a leader and a leadership team, I'm going back to the storyboard thing or the scenario training. The military does exercises all the time for a reason. Mm-hmm. In the commercial world, nobody ever does it. You never have everybody come in, hey, let's buy a company. How do you buy a company? Well, let's practice buying a company. All right, let's everybody get together in 2 weeks, and we're going to have a practice buy a company. And we're going to spend 3 days, and we're going to go through everything, all the steps that we would go through if we were going to buy a company. And then we're going to critique ourselves. Nobody does that.
Yeah.
It's insane.
It would be a great opportunity for some of these offsites or some of these retreats to create these scenarios, learning scenarios.
Yeah, right. I mean, somebody's eating our lunch. We're gonna, by next year, we're gonna be half the revenue we have now.
Yeah.
What do? Go. You have to reinvent yourself.
Yeah.
And you have to do it quickly because it's going to take you months to retool. You might have to do some small acquisitions. You might have to hire certain kinds of special talent. You might have to push into a market you're not in. I mean, these are things that have to be thought through, decided, and executed fairly quickly because it takes time to make them happen. So, that can be trained to, that can be thought through, and that can be practiced and exercised. And then when the day comes when your personal or your company or your organization black swan happens, or God forbid another larger like pandemic level black swan happens,
right,
you are less the victim in the moment.
Less the victim in the moment because you're prepared. In your book, I'm not sure if it's a chapter or a section, you talked about practice strategy, study strategy, and some of the things to do while you are aiming toward that next level. And I really, really like that because it was so in alignment with what I talk to people that I mentor and some of the people in my coaching program, that they want to move up in an organization, but they're just sitting there waiting to be put into the game. And I'm like, there are things you've got to do. There are things you can do to be prepared. So can you talk about that just a little bit before we close out? How to study strategy. I think that's the name of that section. Study strategy. Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, the second book, Be Visionary, is a lot about that.
Okay.
As a matter of fact, somebody that was one of my beta readers while I was writing Be Nimble gave me feedback and said, this chapter could be its own book. And that kind of gave me the thought, okay, I agree.
Oh, I'm excited already.
So I wrote a second book, on it. And the, I guess at the root of your question is, one, what is strategy? And two, is it something that can be learned? Mm-hmm. So if strategy is just the art of envisioning what you want to be or what you want your organization to be at some time in the future, well, the first thing you have to do is free your mind up and take some time to sit down and be visionary.
Yeah.
To think about the future and dream, and then maybe toss the dream around and make it a little bit more realistic, but you shouldn't limit yourself. This is what I want to do. I want to be, the starting guard on in the Green Bay Packers in the NFL. Okay, how do I get to that point? See, once you've found out in your mind what you truly want to be and what you want to achieve, or how you want to look at a certain point in time. I always look by look. I'm a conceptual guy. Mm-hmm. So at that point, you have an end state. Now you can back plan from the end state. So strategy to me is more of the noun. It's the objective. A lot of times people use strategy as a verb. The how to get to that end point for me is not about strategy. The how to is operational. It's operational planning. It's operational execution, broken down into smaller bits and bytes. It's the technical and tactical steps, of performance that lead up to each milestone of that operational plan, and you tweak it. But what you don't do is you don't change the end goal. If you want to go to Wally World in 10 years, then, you're going to Wally World, whether you go, straight there, you fly there, you go around in a ship and, circumnavigate, the United States to get to it, whatever it is, you're going to get to Wally World. And that gives you clarity and a sense of purpose that's very powerful because you have a place to go. Yeah. Now, if you're somebody that's sitting there and you don't know what you want to do, or you don't think anybody's going to elevate you or move you up an organization, forget your positional rank in that org chart. Do what I just said. Write it up in a one-page, thought paper. Put it forward. This is where I think XYZ Corporation should be in 10 years. what are they going to do? I mean, they're not going to fire you.
Mm-hmm.
And you might actually get somebody to go, wow, because they're not thinking about it, because most leaders are thinking about putting out fires. Most of them are, optimization is the enemy of strategy, which is the point I make in the second book. Because if you focus on what you can measure, and you focus on what you can, if what you measure is what you can manage, and you focus on measuring, and technology helps you hyper measure, you find yourself studying the tips of your toes all day.
Yeah.
At the very top too.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So you might find you're gonna have a huge impact when you didn't think anybody was even listen to you.
Yeah.
So yeah. So think, dream, project what you think things should look like in the future. Depending on what you're in, if it's a really dynamic industry, whatever, 10 years is too long. 10 years is light years. So, pick 24 months or 36 months.
All right. Right. And be operational. Do something. Don't just create that strategic plan and put it on the shelf. I'll put it into action. That's what I always tell them.
I mean, I'm sure there'll be problems with it once you back plan and create an operational timeline and all that, and resource shortfalls and everything. But at least do it.
Yeah.
If it turns out it just costs too much, whatever, doesn't mean the plan's bad, or it means the plan's bad, maybe the goal's not bad.
Right.
So rethink the way you get to Wally World.
Right. Marty, what are you reading that we should be reading?
I just finished a really good book. It's by Patrick Bet-David. It's BET-David. He's an American-Iranian. Fascinating book. It's called Your Next 5 Moves.
Ooh.
And I listened to it in Audible, but I really, really liked it. I like to zoom in and zoom out all the time. We just talked about zooming out with strategy and vision, all that. He talks about the value of thinking 5 moves ahead all the time, every day.
Mm-hmm.
And that it's a discipline, it's a daily discipline. And then he talks about a lot of other things that are really great for business leaders and lots of different levels of business organizations. So I just finished that one.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to add that to my list because I love the concept of your next 5 moves and thinking ahead. We've been chatting with Marty Strong, Navy SEAL officer, CEO, and Chief Strategy Officer and author. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Visit the show notes to see how to connect with Marty. Grab a copy of Results Driven Organizations. And also while you're in the show notes, grab Marty's book, Be Nimble, How the Creative Navy SEAL Mindset Wins on the Battlefield and in Business. Until next time.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Results Driven Organizations podcast with Dr. Tanya Lowe. Be sure to review the show notes for the resources mentioned, and don't forget to grab your free gift available at freegiftfromtanya.com. Until next time.